she can't marry without his permission, and can't get medical treatment or go to work without his permission. Now, someone like Rahaf, who has said, and her claims have been documented now, was abused by her family. Imagine being a woman who's trying to escape an abusive home. And I was talking to a Saudi woman today who was telling me that one of her friends was abused by her father and went to complain to the police, because there are now some limited protections for women in Saudi Arabia when it comes to domestic violence. So she went to the police and complained, and the police, imagine this, said to her, your father, who is the male guardian who was abusing her, has to now come and sign off this complaint. So there are some shelters for women in Saudi Arabia, but the women are then sent back home to the same abusive environment as long as the male guardian promises he won't abuse her again. Some women are thrown into these so-called homes for women, which are essentially prisons for women, for minor morality violations and for disobedience. If you disobey your male guardian, it's considered a crime. And these women can spend the rest of their lives in these so-called homes for prison unless a male guardian picks them up. So this is an incredibly controlling system. As I said, it's a form of gender apartheid. And as you saw the scramble to get Rahaf back home, I mean, you have to ask yourself, this is like property that is being claimed by a male guardian. The world has to pay attention to the legitimate plight of Saudi women, and they have been fighting for years. We shouldn't ask where are the Saudi women. They're there, but they're in prison and they're silenced by a regime that wants to control every aspect of their life.
And Mona, just how powerful are Raha's family, and what might their reaction be to this, what she's done?
Well, I confirmed with Rahaf and with one of her friends who I was in touch with when Rahaf was barricaded in the hotel that her father is a governor in a province in Saudi Arabia. So he is a very well-connected man. He comes from a very powerful, strong tribal family that is connected to higher-ups. So you can imagine the muscle that was behind him to bring her back. And the fact that you heard the Saudi official today talking at the news conference in Bangkok, joking about how the Thai officials should have taken her phone instead of her passport. I mean, that is really chilling. Can you imagine being a Saudi woman who wants to claim asylum somewhere, and the officials of your country are encouraging other countries without any legal right to take your phone? Now, what we saw happen around Rahaf today, or just over the past few days, not just today, is the world came together in an incredible show of global solidarity for this very courageous young woman who saved herself. We have to give her tremendous credit. This young woman said, I deserve to be free, and she went out there because she knew that she deserved to be free, and the world came together for her. Imagine Rahaf didn't have her phone with her. Imagine Rahaf didn't have access to the internet. So we have to listen to Saudi women. And in listening to Saudi women, we have to focus on the women in prison and demand their release. And when we do that, we also have to remember that there are migrant women in Saudi Arabia, domestic workers and other women who have even less rights than Saudi women. So let's dismantle this guardianship system. Let's dismantle this form of gender apartheid. Let's tell the Saudi regime we do not buy their lies about emancipating women just because they lifted a ban on driving. Let's listen to the Saudi feminists who for decades have been fighting to be free in their own country.
Well, Mona, just very quickly, we're running out of time, but I just have two very important questions. Rahaf isn't completely out of danger yet, is she? And she possibly might not be for the rest of her life. And also, Saudi leaders can't be pleased about how this has been thrust into the spotlight.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, she's not going to be safe because we need her, first of all, to get asylum and have that finished. But we don't know what her family's going to do. We don't know if they're going to track her down. Look what the Saudi regime did to Jamal Khashoggi. They lured him into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and dismembered him and dissolved his body. So we need this young woman to get all the protection that she deserves. As for the Saudi regime, you can imagine the embarrassment to them. This 18-year-old, incredibly courageous young woman has wrong-footed them. And you just go on social media and check the orchestrated attacks by pro-regime trolls against me and everyone else who's been supporting Rahaf. I have been called every name under the sun that you can imagine just because I helped this young woman amplify her voice. They are incredibly distraught at the fact that this 18-year-old has called out the lie of this claim that they're emancipating women, and she has imposed on the global consciousness this form of gender apartheid called the guardianship system. So let's continue to support her and demand that the Saudis release imprisoned feminists and end the guardianship system.
Mona, really good to talk to you tonight. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, Australia's Foreign Minister will visit Thailand tomorrow. Marise Payne says she will advocate for refugee footballer Hakeem Al-Araibi, who's detained in Bangkok, to be released and allowed to return to Australia. And she'll also sign a memorandum of understanding with Thailand on cyber security and digital trade during the visit. In breaking news tonight, American news networks are reporting the US Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is expected to leave his role in the coming weeks. There were no indications in the reports he was being forced out by Donald Trump. Earlier today, the president made a televised address from the Oval Office where he sought to build public support for his controversial war with Mexico. North America correspondent James Glenday reports.
The President of the United States speaking to the nation.
President Trump in his primetime address.
It was a 9-minute speech with no new arguments, but this primetime plea came from the president's inner sanctum.
My fellow Americans.
As Donald Trump attempted to use the prestige of the Oval Office to put more pressure on Congress to fund his long-promised border wall.
This is a choice between right and wrong, justice and injustice.
Ronald Reagan used the backdrop following the Challenger space shuttle disaster. JFK appeared amid the Cuban Missile Crisis. Donald Trump, in his first such address, struck a slightly softer tone.
This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul.
But while some of his language about migrants on the Mexican border was more nuanced, the overarching message remained the same. Only a wall can keep America safe from drugs and illegal immigrants.
When I took the oath of office, I swore to protect our country. And that is what I will always do.
Unsurprisingly, his speech, which contained misleading claims, did nothing to convince his Democratic opponents to wave his budget demand through.
The symbol of America should be the Statue of Liberty, not a 30-foot wall.
And as the partial government shutdown enters a 19th day and threatens to become the longest in history, they urge Donald Trump to back down.
We don't govern by temper tantrum. No president should pound the table and demand he gets his way, or else the government shuts down.
There was an enormous amount of media hype surrounding this speech, including a large amount of speculation as to whether or not Donald Trump would resort to declaring a national emergency to push his policy through. But at the end of it all, not a lot has really changed here. Negotiations resume tomorrow, and yet a solution still seems a very long way off. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
Meanwhile, trade talks between the US and China have ended, but what they discussed and agreed on is yet to be released. The negotiations were extended by a day amid signs of progress, but it's unclear whether it could help ease tensions following the arrest of Huawei's chief financial officer in Canada. It comes as leaked documents reveal Huawei is alleged to have ties to holding companies in Iran and Syria, countries which remain under international sanctions. Well, I'm joined now by Lynette Ong, an associate professor of political science at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. Lynette, welcome. Now, how do you think this Huawei case has affected trade and diplomatic ties between the US and China?
I think we are in a geopolitical situation where the relations between the US and China are going through some fundamental changes from one of a more cooperative relationship to a more competitive relationship. So the arrest of Meng Wanzhou is very much interpreted by the Chinese as a politically calculated act. So whether or not Huawei has actually violated some sanctions is never really the question. The question is really why the arrest and why the arrest now amidst the technology war and the trade war going on.
So why do you believe China is shooting itself in the foot over Huawei, and how do you believe that China should actually deal with it?
Because I think if Chinese authorities' purpose is to help Huawei to become an international player, it, I think, really needs to convince the world, particularly Western consumers and Western governments, that we can trust Huawei with our data. Just because Huawei is from China, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily untrustworthy, because Google and Facebook, for instance, also have in possession a lot of our private data. But I think after the arrest, after the detentions of the Canadians, it becomes so much more difficult to make a case for Huawei. Because, if we were to get into any sort of dispute with the Chinese firm, the likelihood of Chinese authorities intervening in the situation is actually pretty high. And so I think China has lost a lot of moral legitimacy, and it is actually not playing its card right.
Well, we've learned new information today. What exactly is Huawei being accused of by the US? Can you give us more details?
It is being accused of financial fraud, which is linked to some holding companies, so overall violating Iran's sanctions, as well as some financial fraud.
And how might this new information that we've learned impact the case that's going on with Ms. Meng?
I think Canada, it really, so now that Meng is in the custody of Canadian authorities, the decision is really that of the Canadian court. I think the evidence, the new evidence, would just lend further weight to the decision against Meng, which is not in Huawei's favor. But I think to the Chinese authorities, it wouldn't make much of a difference one way or the other.
And just finally, how damaging has all of this been to Huawei internationally?
I think it has been pretty damaging. For instance, in Canada, the public opinion has actually swung so much against Huawei, and also against China as a whole, that it would be difficult. I think Canada is among one or two countries among the Five Eyes communities that have not actually made a decision one way or the other whether to use Huawei. But I think after this series of detentions, it is a lot more difficult to convince the public that Huawei doesn't pose a threat to our national security.
Lynette Ong, thanks so much for joining The World tonight.
Thank you.
Now, federal police are investigating suspicious packages sent to a string of foreign consulates and embassies across Melbourne and Canberra. It follows the discovery of a similar envelope containing asbestos and fiberglass at the Argentinian consulate in Sydney on Monday.
After discovering letters and packages containing suspicious substances, staff at a number of consulates in Melbourne and people from offices nearby were evacuated, including those from the consulates of India, the US and Switzerland. The Metropolitan Fire Service responded quickly, dispatching crews across the city.
It was a little bit confronting, not knowing exactly what was going on. We didn't have much information, so it was a bit of a surprise.
A spokesperson for the New Zealand consulate said the word asbestos was written on a small package it received. A Pakistani official told the ABC she was also worried asbestos was in the package she opened. At this stage, it's not clear if any of the packages contained dangerous substances, but Ambulance Victoria reported it did not treat anybody. Investigators from the Australian Federal Police and Victoria Police are working together to find out who might be behind the suspect deliveries. In a statement, Victoria Police said it was aware of a number of consulate officers in Melbourne today receiving suspicious packages. At this time, we believe the matter is targeted and not impacting the general community. The Australian Federal Police, which investigates incidents at foreign missions in Australia, said the circumstances surrounding these incidents are being investigated. In the ACT, the Israeli embassy also confirmed receiving a letter. There was a similar incident on Monday in Sydney, affecting the Argentinian consulate in the city. It's not clear what, if any, connection there is between these various attacks. As disruptive as today's action in Melbourne was, it could have been worse had it not been summer holiday time. Karen Percy, ABC News, Melbourne.
An oil tanker has exploded off the coast of Hong Kong, killing at least one person and injuring several others. The Vietnam-registered vessel burst into flames as it prepared to refuel at an anchorage. 23 people were rescued, but 2 crew members are still missing. Officials say the ship's cargo appears to be the source of the blaze. Video of a helicopter pilot pulling off a precision manoeuvre in the French Alps to rescue an injured skier has emerged online. During the rescue, the pilot wedges the nose of the helicopter into the snow to get close to the injured skier. It's a move that takes amazing skill and is very daring. French mountain police can then be seen hoisting the injured party into the helicopter before it flies away. The rescue happened last week, and French news agencies say it happened at an altitude of more than 2,000 metres. The injured skier was taken to hospital. Amazing footage there. Nearly 1,500 lizards have been set free in a region of the Galapagos Islands. Conservationists have released hundreds of land iguanas to Santiago Island. The scaly critters were wiped out by feral pigs 184 years ago, and the last person to record a land iguana here was Charles Darwin. Well, the feral pigs have been removed, meaning it's safe for the lizards to return. A New Zealand university is behind the restoration program, which involves capturing them from a neighbouring island and moving them here. Royal comedy drama The Favourite has been nominated for 12 awards at this year's BAFTAs, including Best Picture. The film has already captured several prizes for its star, Olivia Colman, who's also up for Best Actress. The pre-civil rights road movie Green Book is also up for Best Picture, alongside A Star is Born, Roma and Black Klansman. Bohemian Rhapsody received 7 nods, including Outstanding British Film. Now, millions of people have flooded the streets of Manila to try and touch a 4-century-old statue of Jesus Christ. The statue, which can be seen underneath dozens of Filipinos, was carved in Mexico in 1606, and local Catholics believe it can grant wishes and heal disease when touched. It's also believed the statue turned black soon after it was carved. The statue is carried on a 6-kilometre procession through Manila on January the 9th every year. The cycling world's focus will be on Adelaide for the next 10 days, with the Tour Down Under set to begin tomorrow. The event kicks off with a 4-day women's race.
The men's Tour Down Under is a top-flight international race, and 7 years into its existence, the women's tour is evolving towards a similar level. This is the 4th year in its current form, and 2-time defending champion Amanda Spratt is the clear favourite.
It's a race that's really special for me. It's an Australian race, and I just love the way this race is getting so much bigger so quickly.
Arguably the strongest field yet will vie for the Oka Leaders jersey. Italian Elisa Longo Borghini is considered a contender. But with a new team in her TDU debut, she isn't placing too much pressure on herself.